Good evening. My name is Stuart Fett. I've been asked this evening to provide some history on Fincantieri Bay Shipbuilding. I started at Bay Shipbuilding in December of 1974, and I retired from Bay Shipbuilding in August of 2019 as the production manager. Bay Shipbuilding was started by the Manitowoc Company. So the three gentlemen that started the Manitowoc Company were Elias Gunnell, Charles West, and Linford Gear. A little bit about each one of these gentlemen. Mr. Gunnell, family immigrated from Ireland in 1875. And at 36 years old, he had 20 years of shipbuilding experience. Mr. Gunnell was considered to be gruff, forceful. He was extremely fiercely independent, and he was considered by all to be a mechanical expert. He was known as Cap because of his knowledge of the shipbuilding industry. He was the general superintendent of the Chicago shipyard. He also designed and developed pneumatic tools. He had a very strong relationship with the ship owners, and he was driven by efficiency. Mr. West was born in Chicago, Illinois in 1878. At 24 years old, he graduated from Cornell University in mechanical engineering and was president of his college class. He was described as being a supercharged and forward-looking person. He was the youngest of 4 children of John and Annie Ladd West. He was pampered by his parents. So in other words, he was the family favorite. His childhood was one of wealth and privilege. His father was John West, a grain trader who had a seat on the Chicago Board of Trade. Mr. Gear, his family was the 9th generation of English immigrants coming to Massachusetts in 1635. He was the accountant for the Chicago Shipbuilding Company. He was always considered to be the money man. And he went on to be the first secretary and treasurer of the Manitowoc Company. So what was the situation of 1902 that convinced these three gentlemen that they needed to seek out their own shipyard? So West, Gunnell, and Greer were all employed at the Chicago Shipbuilding. And all three of them held positions in leadership and management. The Chicago Shipbuilding Company, at the turn of the last century, was considered to be one of the most progressive on the Great Lakes. In 1899, however, American Shipbuilding Company purchased the Chicago Shipbuilding Company, the Cleveland Shipyard, Global Iron Works, Ship Owners Drydeck, Detroit Drydeck, American Steel Barge, and Milwaukee Dock. In 1902, all the administrative, design, and engineering, sales, and accounting were all going to be moved from all of these facilities to the Cleveland facility. So consequently, the career of all three of these men were to be diminished. So they decided that they needed to look for their own shipyard. So what was the business climate of the early 1900s that led to their decision? The Civil War had ended in 1860, and the country was in the process of a rebuilding. Skilled immigrants from Europe moved to America. Many of those immigrants that came to America were skilled in the shipbuilding industry and seemed to settle in the Great Lakes region. There was a huge game changer at the time. Iron ore was discovered in the upper Michigan and Minnesota area, and new steel mills were being constructed in the southern end of the lakes. So consequently, you had iron ore to the north and processing facilities to the south. Steel output grew from 1.5 million tons to 28 million tons. Most product was considered to be moved by ships because it is by far the most cost-effective way to move the product. So the business climate for building ships was very good. So the three men decided that they needed to go on their own and purchase their own shipyard. So they looked throughout the Great Lakes, and they happened to find a company called Berger Boat in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. Henry Berger was retiring, and he had his shipyard for sale. One of the things that was a hallmark of the Burger Company and certainly of Manitowoc Company was that nothing better can be said of a boat than it was a Burger boat. Quality was absolutely a must. So why Manitowoc? Why look at Manitowoc? At the time, it was the center of marine commerce. It was located near Milwaukee and Chicago. It was a port of call for large passenger and freight lines, so there were ships coming in and out all the time. It also happened to be the home port of the Goodrich Transportation Company. So one of your leading potential customers is sitting in the same area that you are. And Manitowoc had a very good railroad system. It was a railroad port, so it was easy to move raw material in and out. And the car ferries carrying grain, coal across the lakes were porting out of Manitowoc. The ships filled the harbor in the winter repair. The river was wide and deep enough to accommodate ship construction. Manitowoc had a history of shipbuilding since 1847, and the area labor was considered to be very highly skilled. The swing bridges were wide enough to accommodate large ships, and Henry and George Burger struck a friendship with Gunno, West, and Greer. This was rather important because there was other parties that were looking at purchasing this facility. But Mr. Burger really liked these three guys and promised them that they could have first rights to the shipyard. And it seemed like the stars in heaven were aligned. So on the way back to Chicago, Mr. West asked Mr. Geer what was the financial situation that he looked over the books, and Mr. Geer told him it was a very healthy profit. It was a $15,000 profit off $150,000 sales, considered to be a very high profit in the day. So the three offered to purchase the Burger Boat Company on June 11th, 1902, for the selling price of $110,000. $60,000 were in cash, and the remainder was the mortgage through Mr. West. Articles of incorporation were signed on 6/27/1902, and $150,000 in stocks were sold, 1,500 shares at $100 each. This was a hallmark of the Manitowoc Company. You know, they always wanted to share the risk with other folks, and they wanted the other folks as stockholders to fund the business. The Manitowoc Drydeck Company took possession on 10/11/02 with Mr. Gunno being the president, Mr. Greer was the secretary-treasurer, and Mr. West was the general manager. Of course, when you start any new company, you know, things are not always what you think they may be, and there could be some humbling beginnings. So they struggled the very first year, of course, but they did manage to use the revenues from the wooden ship construction and repair to pay for the business and pay for the operating cost. They used the excess money from the stock sale to build the steel fabrication. They had came from the Chicago shipyard, which was a leading ship manufacturer and considered by all to be probably the most progressive yard on the Great Lakes. So they knew that they had to take their shipyard from wood and convert it into steel. And Mr. Gunno also equipped the shop with machine tools and began training the workers. So by 1904, the Manitowoc Drydeck Company, the original name, was ready for steel ship construction and repair. Also in August of 1904, Mr. Gunno organized his machine company. So growing the company, one of the hallmarks and one of the things that I always heard all the years that I worked for the Manitowoc Company was you must diversify. It's the three-legged stool. When I worked there, it was shipbuilding, cranes, and ice. Three-legged, diverse businesses. So the Gunno Machine Shop built the winches, the hoisting gears, and machine parts. The goal of these gentlemen was to grow the business and be able to manufacture all the major components for shipbuilding. So in 1909, they purchased the Manitowoc Steam Boiler Works, which gave them the ability to build their own boilers for shipbuilding, but also gave them a diversification where they built digesters, they built furnaces, kilns, dredge dippers, ladles, buoys, and heavy buckets. They continued to make some other purchases, and they purchased the Manitowoc Foundry Company, which gave them sources for casting. In 1910, they delivered the Steel Hull Alabama, which at the time was considered to be the finest passenger vessel on the Great Lakes. Mr. Gunno was the leading designer on this, also oversaw all of the production, including the first steel plate that went down to the very last joiner workpiece that went in. In 1910, they changed the name to the Manitowoc Shipbuilding and Drydeck Company. Of course, as they went through history, World War I was looming. In 1916, they received orders for freighters from the Norwegian and the British companies. However, the U.S. Board of Emergency Fleet stepped in and purchased all the freighters that were under construction for their use, and the Manitowoc Company delivered 33 of those freighters. Mr. West was also very highly regarded in the shipbuilding industry, and Henry Ford had started a shipyard in River Rouge, Michigan, to fabricate submarine destroyers known as the Eagle boats. However, they did not have the ability, they did not have the know-how in order to get that business started. So it says that Mr. West was recruited. I feel as though he probably had his arm twisted by the government in order to go there and get that going. So here's another hallmark. They sold $500,000 because they knew they had to upgrade their shipyard for a shipyard expansion. And the shipyard then occupied the entire peninsula. They had 65 buildings, 7 cranes, telephones, floating docks. They had railroad systems throughout the yard to bring materials in, to bring pieces to the build site, to transfer sections. Considered to be an extremely modernized shipyard. And at the time, there was no housing that was available. They were hiring so many people that Manitowoc did not have the proper housing. So they converted the steamer Chicago to a workforce housing. History in 1920 to 1938. Of course, the war has ended. Things were not looking so good. During the war years, the shipyard grew from constructing 2 ships a year to 18 ships a year. And when the war ended in 1920, there was really no prospects for new construction. The workforce was reduced from 2,500 personnel to 500. The company had a very large elephant on its hands. It had too much capacity for what the marketplace was demanding. When the war ended, the government paid for the ships that were under construction and had previously agreed to pay for all the rolling stock, the plates, the steel, all the things necessary to build the remainder of the ships. However, they came back and said, no, we're not going to pay for that material. That material belongs to you. The war expansion efforts were also subject to federal tax unless scrapped. And that was very difficult because it was almost impossible to identify which buildings and what expansion projects were paid for by the government and which ones were paid for by the company. The interest, the taxes, the rental fees, and the general overhead expenses continued on this very large business. And not only that, but of course after the war, the foreign exchange rate was not favorable for the United States, and it was almost impossible for them to bid on ships for other countries. The effort to save the shipyard by repairing railroad engines, boxcars, diesel engines, boilers, and general ship outfitting was the idea of Mr. West. He felt as though he could save the company by diversifying. On May 2nd, in 1920, they did sell some of their assets. They sold the boiler shop, the engine building plant, the graving dock, and the real estate business. And the stockholders put the shipyard up for sale for $400,000. The leading person that was really behind this sale was Mr. Gunno. Mr. Gunno was getting a little bit further in life. He did not really want to take the chance to lose his stock price. he convinced some of the other stockholders that they should sell the shipyard, take their profits, and abandon the business. This was something, this war production experience was one that Mr. West said that he never forgot, and as it came around again, he was going to remember it and do things a little differently. So I have a picture of what the shipyard looked like, and you can see that the whole peninsula is filled up with ships, with production facilities, a very, very busy facilities. So the shipyard went up for sale. And there was a rumor in Manitowoc that there was other companies looking at it, and that there was actually some folks that had walked through and were going to make an offer on it. Now you have to remember that at this time, Manitowoc Ship was not the only one. All the other shipyards on the Great Lakes had suffered the same low interest in shipbuilding and were in the same situation. So Mr. West made the only offer that there was in July of 1920 to purchase the shipyard. The stockholders did accept the offer of $41,000 in cash the day of the sale, $69,000 payable in 5 days, and $300,000 in 3 months. And of course, Mr. West again financed it by issuing $1 million in common stock and $500,000 in preferred stock. And the company had 5 new directors and were issued $250,000 in preferred stock and $375,000 in common stock. And Mr. West also agreed to purchase the tools, the floating docks, and the remaining material for $250,000. The old company that was spun off actually became the Maritime Security Company, which included 2 real estate companies formed during the war to develop housing. And at this time, you know, Mr. West knew that with the departure of Mr. Gunnell, he needed to get more talent into the business if he was going to proceed ahead. So he brought in John Wallace, who was a mechanical engineer with a master's degree in naval architect, Archibald Rankin, a chief engineer from England, John Thinnell for advertisement, and Armand Pitts, who had a master's in engineering degree from MIT. The principles that Mr. West stepped forward was the company should always maintain a cash reserve. A lot of companies call this keep dry powder. In case an opportunity comes along, you can act quickly and make a purchase. Always anticipate the marketplace needs and invest in product development were the hallmarks of the new company. They built 5 marine products between 1920 and 1930. They were off and running, so they had a new beginning. Mr. West was the sole proprietor. He was relieved. He actually said that he had, yes, a lot more responsibility, but he also felt relieved that he was solely in charge and he could make the decisions that were necessary in order for the company to go forward. In the 1930 decades, they built 56 marine units. A couple things about Mr. West. He always drove a Cadillac to the shipyards every day, where the mechanic would wait for him and wash the vehicle and service it. He was considered to be a radiant, warm, good-willed, and he loved visiting with the men. He often walked the shipyard enjoying the smell of machine oil, burning steel, and the turmoil of ship construction. They name it as turmoil. From my stint as production manager, I always call it managing chaos. And he had a deep appreciation for the skilled workmanship. There was also, the Manitowoc Company had no uncrossable barriers between Mr. West and the men. And the Manitowoc Shipbuilding Company was off to a good start. And of course, entered World War II, where it would take the company to all sorts of new challenges. Mr. West wanted to get in on he knew that the war effort would require ships to be built. He really wanted to build destroyers. But the problem was with destroyers was that it was hard to get them off of the lakes. So he devised a plan to transfer vessels from Manitowoc to the sea. They would launch the ship in Manitowoc on Lake Michigan, and they would transfer it to the Illinois River and onto the Mississippi River. The ship had too much draft. It was too deep. So what they did is devise a plan to put the ship back in the dry dock in Rockport, Illinois, and float it down all the way down to Illinois, or excuse me, all the way down to the Gulf in the dry dock. Again, he intended to build destroyers, but to his surprise, the U.S. Navy summons him to Washington and wanted to have a discussion with him. And the Navy wanted submarines. This made Mr. West pause. You know, submarines were extremely difficult to build. He traveled back to Manitowoc on the train, and when he got back to Manitowoc, he had a very intense management discussion on submarine construction with his senior staff. One of the other things that they did was to bring John West, Mr. West's son, was to join and head up the submarine production team. Submarines are the ultimate shipbuilding challenge. I have a picture of one of the submarines in the dry dock that they built during World War II. So the Manitowoc construction team was a little uneasy, of course, going forward with building submarines. So the government said, well, you know, we are going to form a partnership between you and Electric Boat. And if you know about Electric Boat still builds nuclear submarines for the United States Navy even to this day. And Mr. West also had a relationship with the gentleman that was running Electric Boat. And during the tour, they were walking the shipyard together, and Mr. West looked at what they were doing, and his comment was, "Damn it, Armin, if these fellows can build submarines, we can too." And that was it. That was the decision. We are going to go forward with submarine building. The agreement was formed with Electric Boat at the Manitowoc Company that Electric Boat would help on technical design and actually put personnel into the shipyard to help oversee the construction. And in September of 1940, Manitowoc received the contract for the first 10 Gato-class submarines. The submarine construction was to take place indoors. They were very concerned about contamination. They were very concerned about weather conditions. And the decision that they made was these submarines have to be built indoors. Each one consisted of 16 sections weighing 30 to 60 tons. Manitowoc had a crane division that they had developed with the Moore brothers, and were manufacturing cranes as part of the Moore speed crane manufacturing line. So the crane division looked at this and said, well, okay, we know what the weight of the sections are, we know what the crane capacity has to be. So the crane division manufactured and developed a special series of 3,900 cranes to handle the weight of the sections and support the sectional outfitting strategy. They also built a section crawler that would take the sections from the shop and bring them out to the building berth. And they were very unique, and Mr. John West, Charles' son, was very big into this. He designed and built rotating jigs for the sections so that the most welding could be done in the downhand welding. They were very, very concerned about quality. And they felt as though this was the only way that they could maintain the quality of the welds. And in 6/18/1941, which is not many months after they received the contract, the submarine sections, the first submarine section was moved from the shop to the building berth. And they were building more than one section. They were geared up. So 5 days later, the second section came out. And of course, followed by Pearl Harbor on December 7th of 1941. And all submarines were side-launched using the Manitowoc method. The United States Navy at the time was very fearful of this method. Manitowoc engineers convinced the Navy, and they did a series of testing in order to prove that this method was safe and was the best way of doing it. So I have a picture of the Manitowoc in the time building sections. You can see them lifting a section with their 3,900 cranes onto the building berth. A shot of the shop, and you can see some of the sections from the submarines, and you can kind of make out the jigs, the turning jigs that they designed for turning parts and pieces of the submarine in order to assure welding quality. And here we have a picture of the submarine out on the building berth where they're joining the sections together. And a picture of the shipyard during World War II. The square building that you see is actually the main office building. It has an interesting history. They moved that building using their Drydeck to this area on the peninsula, and then it was remodeled during World War II. And of course, a picture of the famous Manitowoc side launching of submarines. The original thought was that they were going to take the submarines to the Gulf and that they would do the test down there, but the government wanted the submarines badly, obviously, after the Japanese attack, and so sea trials were taken off of Sheboygan in 300 feet of water. In February 1942, West was called to Washington, D.C. to also build new landing crafts to ferry tanks and equipment. Manitowoc designed and built the first 36 of these units and were the lead yard in 400 more units. The units were designed by the engineers at the time to be bolted together, so steel plates could be manufactured throughout the Midwest, brought to Manitowoc, assembled, and then delivered. Another hallmark of the Manitowoc Company is, of course, they were very, very efficient. They finished the landing crafts at 62% of budget, and they were months ahead of schedule. This was the vision of the company founders. They were asked for an advanced LCT design, and the company designed 1,000 units by using their subcontractor firms. In 1942, June of 1942, the Manitowoc Company was awarded the Boleo class submarines, a little bit different submarines than the original ones, an upgrade from the original ones that they were building. Their crane market was also going great guns. They sold 278 cranes during the war to the military. Peak employment in the little city of Manitowoc was 7,000 people. Time magazine at the time wrote an article that referred to the workers as cheesemakers and cherry pickers. This, of course, Mr. West took great offense to this statement. Workers were trained under the Gunno Plan and were some of the most highly skilled workers in the country. Manitowoc built a greatly detailed wooden mock-up of the entire submarine, all the pipes, all the gauges, all the wires, everything in a wooden mock-up. And that mock-up was used and saved them a ton of time by the engineering and the construction group. And in remembering what happened to Mr. West in the First World War, Mr. West was already planning in 1943 for the direction of the company in the post-war era. Some of the things that were happening, just interesting, they had a little newspaper that the company published called the Keel Block, and that was published well into the 1970s, 80s, 90s. And it is, it's a piece of communication between the management team and the workforce. During World War II, they had a women's softball league. They had their own hospital. Obviously, the employees were working 7 days a week, so the company recognized the fact that they had to do something to relieve their stress. So they would bring in entertainment directly into the shipyard, and there was a weekly radio show that was done inside the shipyard for the Chicago crowd. A combination of honest workmanship, engineering, and organizational skills, plus conscientious attention to details in all phases of construction and delivery of these ships, gained for the Manitowoc Shipbuilding Company an inviolable reputation which was formed by their ship's performance in combat. It was and is my considered opinion that the best submarines constructed by any shipbuilding yard, private or government, during the war were these 28 Manitowoc-built ships. And that was written to the Manitowoc Company by Commander Ralph M. Metcalf. Very highly skilled, very high-end products. So what was going to go on after the post-war? So the lessons of World War I, were loomed in Mr. West's head, and he was preparing for post-war. The marine work, he figured, after World War II would marine work during World War II represented 90% of the company output. Mr. West estimated that that could go down to 20% post-war. The workforce had to be reduced from 1,900 compared to the 627 after World War I. Labor was directed to cranes, to shovels, to barking drums, boilers, pulp digesters, cement kilns, and newly developed light steel manufacturing. They're making a move into the refrigeration business. 70% of the stock owned by the companies were employees and family members. Remember, after World War I, they were forced to sell the company because the stockholders that held the stock wanted their money. Here, the stock was owned by the employees and family members. The stockholders were paid a 3.25 dividend. The company was debt-free. So they moved past the war. In 1950, the Bradley Company line of U.S. Steel awarded a contract for the John C. Munson Hull 715. This was a mammoth ship at the time. It was 660 feet long, and it was a self-unloader. A very large ship. In 1952, Manitowoc Shipbuilding Company became Manitowoc Company with two wholly owned subsidiaries, Manitowoc Shipbuilding and Manitowoc Engineering Company. John West, the son of Charles West, was promoted to president. A lot of their business after the war was also in converting and retrofitting many of the ships. And also during the 1950s, they received orders from the American Steamship Company for the John J. Boland, the Detroit Edison, and the Adam E. Cornelius. Shipping companies were demanding, however, that larger capacity vessels with fewer men be built. This is what the customers were telling Manitowoc Company. And a sad day, Mr. West, the original founder, died on 10/3 of 1957 at the age of 80. Here's a picture of the Manitowoc Company building one of those large vessels up on the ways. You can see the number of cranes that they're using. You can also see some of the conversions and some of the repair work that they're doing. Very, very busy shipyard. Not as busy as World War II, but very busy. They had gone from military work to commercial work. Here's a picture of their special cranes setting a very heavy, large bow section. And in 1960, they received the contract for the Edward Ryerson. It was 730 feet long by 75 feet long, the most powerful, largest vessel of its day on the Great Lakes. And then what happened? There were some game changers that happened. In 1968, the pole locks at Sault Ste. Marie opened, allowing for 1,100-foot ships to transfer from Lake Superior to the lower Great Lakes. In 1970, the Merchant Marine Act allowed the Great Lakes shipping owners to gain guaranteed government mortgage loans. There was no room for shipyard expansion in Manitowoc in order to meet the needs of the future shipbuilding. And of course, the Jones Act, which requires that all ships that start in a U.S. port and end in a U.S. port be built in this country. So where were you going to go? The company said, we can't stay in Manitowoc. We have to look for a deep water port. We have to look for another facility that we can stay in the shipbuilding and the new market that looms. So in 1968, the Manitowoc Company purchased the Sturgeon Bay shipyard and Drydeck Company. Sturgeon Bay was a deep water harbor with a straight line access to the lake. West renamed the company Bay Shipbuilding Corporation. It was a wholly owned subsidiary of the Manitowoc Shipbuilding Company. In 1970, Manitowoc purchased the Christie Corporation in a bankruptcy sale. In the beginning, Mr. Art Zielke was the president of Bay Shipbuilding. Mr. John West was promoted and was the president and CEO of Manitowoc. They had two shipyards with a scrapyard in the middle, which didn't make it very convenient. So they entered into a long-term agreement with Jack Ginsberg, who owned the scrapyard that separated the two shipyards. In 1972, the Manitowoc Company loaded everything on their dry dock that was pertinent to building ships, and they transferred that dry dock up to Sturgeon Bay. A sad ending. It was the end of the Manitowoc shipbuilding in Manitowoc. After 70 years of building ships of over 400 vessels, including 28 submarines, it was the end of building ships in the Manitowoc city. Lloyd Spooty was hired from the Christie Corporation to become the Bay Shipbuilding's first production manager. A picture of Christie Corporation in Sturgeon Bay. So a little bit about Sturgeon Bay. I mean, Sturgeon Bay also had a very long history of shipbuilding. In 1881, John Latham and Thomas Smith Towing Company built and repaired tugboats, barges, and schooners. Latham Smith took over the company after the death of his father and Thomas Smith. Latham was a graduate of the University of Wisconsin, but really had no background in business and really no background in shipbuilding. However, he did receive a very large contract for building a fleet of tugs from the federal government. And one of his other accomplishments was in 1920 to 1930, Latham patented a self-unloading system for bulk carriers. And they manufactured and constructed 93 vessels for the World War II effort. And unfortunately, Latham Smith drowned in a boating accident in June of 1946. In 1947, Ray Christensen purchased the shipyard and formed the Christie Corporation. In 1969, however, the yard failed constructing the David Starr Jordan for the Fisheries Department. The Christie Corporation had some major accomplishments. They built 5 LSTs for the Cree conflict. They also built 2 very large car ferries, the Badger and the Spartan. That's the south end of the yard, of the present Bay Shipbuilding Yard. The north yard part of it was started by August Rebolt and Joseph Walters, where they moved here in 1898 from Sheboygan, Wisconsin. And in 1906, they renamed their business the Universal Shipbuilding Company, and they operated until 1920. In 1920, Joseph Walters and Joseph O'Boyle reformed the company and changed the name to the Sturgeon Bay Drydeck Company. They built tugs, fleet of tugs in World War I, and also they built the largest wooden ship on the Great Lakes at the time called the City of Sturgeon Bay. However, they were in the wooden shipbuilding business. They attempted to go into the steel portion of shipbuilding. They did receive a contract for a steel-hulled sandsucker, but that caused the business, however, to fail because they did not have the expertise in order to make a transfer over to steel. In 1934, John Rowan purchased the property and operated until the sale to the Manitowoc Company. So they also, this is a letter that the Sturgeon Bay Drydeck Company had received from the United States military, awarding them a flag that flew over their facilities for their expertise in production, and indicated that every employee that worked there was to get a lapel pin to recognize them and for the efforts that they put in. So a very rich history in Sturgeon Bay. Kind of a picture of what the shipyard looked like in 1933. This is the south yard of the present Bay Shipbuilding, which was the Latham Smith shipyard. You can see it was extremely busy. was the facility. The building that you see in the back was the old 308 building. It was actually moved here from Milwaukee during World War II and set up as being the main construction building. And that brings us to Fincantieri Bay Shipbuilding, okay? So you had a lot of expertise coming from Manitowoc Company. You had a lot of expertise and you had a high level of quality workers in the areas in Sturgeon Bay. So Bay Shipbuilding at the time was formed, or better known by the employees as the Love Boat. And I just want to maybe share a picture of some of the senior staff members. Oh, there they are. Maybe not really, just a little bit of humor. Let's take a look at some of the folks that really did work and continue to work at Bay Shipbuilding.
When you think of Sturgeon Bay and Door County, the first thing that comes to my mind is shipbuilding.
I started out as a craft helper, as a steel worker, got up to a mechanic, foreman, and eventually left shipyards here as the hull superintendent.
I was born, raised, and still live about 20 miles from here. I started in the yard, I think it was February of '71, and retired July 7th of last year. So it's 46 years and 5 months.
I usually worked over by the large graving dock, and it's fun to explain how big that is, how much water it holds, the different ships that go through.
I originally started at Manitowoc in 1952 at the shipyards. 1972 we moved to Bay Ship here.
Well, the building program that started in 1972, and we started down south in the South Yard building the smaller boats. The first 1,000-footer, the 700-foot section was built down south, the 300-foot section was built up north here, and of course that led into before the stern section was built, the graving dock was built. I think the graving dock opened up the ability to construct 1,000-footers and also the ability to dry dock 1,000-footers and work year-round to not only do new construction but repair work. So both of them are a key part of the business plan.
The job I did for the last 25 years at one time was done drawing and nailing on the floor. I draw the boat out full size. And then 25 years ago I moved and started computerized lofting on AutoCAD. Did that for the last 25 years.
I don't think there's anybody that lives in Sturgeon Bay that either hasn't had a family member or doesn't know somebody personally that either works here or has worked here. That's how deeply rooted this facility is and this business is in Sturgeon Bay.
Well, it's quite important here. Years ago there was quite a few facilities on the Great Lakes in the shipbuilding industry, you know, Toledo, Moraine, Superior. Some of them have gone by the wayside over the years. So we're one of the ones that held in there and stuck with it.
The jobs attract people. Come from all over, mainly northeastern Wisconsin, but also upper Michigan, and all over the United States actually people come from. And each of those brought something to them that they can help the community with or add to the community or brings up the level of experience in our community.
Bay Ship has really been kind of silent about what they do in our community, and they don't really seek out a lot of attention, but they really do commit. I mean, not just in terms of what they do for payroll and the money that flows through our community, but just in terms of donations and helping our community out.
Shipyard, in my opinion, of course, is everything to the community. I mean, it's in my opinion, the most impressive event above Sturgeon Bay. When you go around different places, we were fortunate enough to go to Europe last summer, talk to the Fincantieri people in Italy, and get pictures of the shipyard where you work, and everybody knows big ships and likes big ships, so it's kind of a worldwide thing.
I think there's a great deal of pride in building a quality boat, and the size of the vessels amazes people.
Well, the nice thing about Bay Ship over the years is that we've established a partnership, I think, between local government and the business community, but specifically Bay Ship. And as a result of that, we've been able to, I hope the city has been able to help Bay Ship grow. And the amount of dollars that flow through our community as a result of Bay Ship, it just can't be taken for granted. I mean, we always have to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that Bay Ship stays viable, that they're profitable, and that they continue to employ, thousands of people.
So Manitowoc moved to Sturgeon Bay to build the next generation of self-unloaders. And on May of 1971, they received a first contract for what they considered to be the next generation of self-unloaders to sail the Great Lakes from Charles E. Wilson from the American Shipbuilding Company, followed by contracts for the H. Lee White, the St. Clair, and the Sam Loud. Also, all three from the American Shipbuilding Company. They also received the contract from Inland Steel to build the Joseph Block. So the early days, Manitowoc moved the entire shipbuilding personnel from Manitowoc to Sturgeon Bay. So much of the early management had came up here from Manitowoc. Not all, but most. The new ships were designed by a gentleman called Bob Miller, who was the chief designing engineer. He was a very unique person, and some of the things that he brought forth was that ships were to be designed for maximum cargo carrying capacity and economy. And ships were going to be built from high-strength steel. This would save 800 tons of ship weight, allowing their ships to carry much more cargo. The cargo holds were extended over the top of the engine rooms, also to increase the cargo carrying capacities, and the conveyors were designed for very high-speed unloading. In 1975, they received their first order for a 1,000-foot vessel called the Belle River, which was later renamed the Walter McCarthy. In all, 6,000-foot vessels were built. The Belle River in 1977, the Charles Wilson Foy in 1978, the Edmund H. Gott in 1978, the Indiana Harbor in 1979, the Burns Harbor in 1980, and the Columbia Star in 1981. And in 1976, in order to accommodate the building of these 1,000-footers, they built their dry dock, the graving dock, which is 1,156 feet long by 140 feet deep. And in 1977, they built the 200-ton gantry crane that represented a $15.4 million investment for the Manitowoc Company. John West personally supervised the construction of both units. And the early management team consisted of Robert Miller, VP and Director of Engineering, Pat O'Hearn, Director of Contract Services, Bob Mitten, Manager of Quality Control, Robert Fisher, Secretary Treasurer, Bruce Shaw, Vice President and Assistant General Manager. A picture of the early management team. And Manitowoc built the crane, the gantry crane, and transferred the parts up here. Here's a picture of a barge being pushed by a tug with a section for the gantry crane, and another picture of the gantry crane being moved to Sturgeon Bay. And this is a picture of them digging the graving dock. You can see that it's a very massive hole. On the very far end of the picture, the very first thing they did was to pound piling and make a piling wall to separate, keep the water out, followed by the gate structure that also was intended to keep the water out. And here shows a picture of them a little further along. You can see where they have starting to pour the walls and the floor, where they continue to dig. It's a picture of a crane pouring cement for the walls of the dry dock. And now I think what we'll do is we'll do a little bit of a flyover, take a look at the facilities. So I have some pictures of some early vessels that were built. Hull 716, the first of the 1,000-footers, the Belle River. She was 1,000 feet long, 105 feet wide, 56 feet deep. Had a capacity of 80,900 gross tons with an unloading rate of 10,000 tons per hour. It was propelled by 4 3,500 General Motors Electro Division EMD engines. Had 37 hatches. Built in 1977 for the American Steamship Company. It is now currently known as the Walter J. McCarthy. The second of the 1,000-footers, Hull 717, the Lewis Wilson Foy, much the same. The third was the Hull 718, was the Gott. Gott was a little bit of a different animal. It did not come out with a swing boom. It had a shuttle boom on it. It did not have EMD engines. It had two 19,500 diesel engines, diesel valve. Those engines have been removed and repowered over the years, and also a swing boom has been put on this vessel in place of the shuttle boom. Hull 719, the Indiana Harbor, much the same as the early boats. 720, pretty much the same as class. The Hull 726, the Columbia Star. So here's a contract list of, you know, what does it look like in a shipyard? Every hull is given a number, a hull number, and that number is whatever the ship has been named. It could be renamed 4, 5, 6, 7 times in the life of that ship. Will always be known by that hull number. So that is a number that will always follow it through. And then there's a description of what the vessel name was, kind of a description of what it is. In this case, in the early years, Hull 701, which was the first hull built in Sturgeon Bay by the Manitowoc Company, was the dump scull for Great Lakes. And actually had a series of vessels that were built, that they built for Great Lakes for the dredging industry. And they also built Washington Island ferry boat until they got to Hull 710, which was now into the new self-unloaders. And then you can see that it was self-unloaders, 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 one really after another. Really was the market, the early market. And some interesting tidbits. The early hulls were constructed on the building berths and side-launched, including the first 800 800-foot section of the very first 1,000-footer to Belle River. The Drydeck was not ready for construction yet, being constructed, and actually the after section was being built in the dock, even though the dock was not complete, nor was the crane usable. They brought in a ringer crane in order to fabricate the after end. The forward section was side-launched and was floated into the graving dock and joined with the after 200 feet of the engine room. Fires were built under the vessel, and the main decks were cooled with water in order to hold the constant steel temperature. I think we bought every soaker hose in the city. The yard continued to expand the building capacity by adding new shops and equipment. And the maritime industry was a very close group, and multi-million-dollar ship contracts were signed by a shake of a hand, something that does not happen today. Welcome to the 1980s. Steelmaking and orders for the Great Lakes ships were declined. Manitowoc saw their ups and downs. When they were in Manitowoc, Bay Shipbuilding was seeing their ups and downs when they came to Sturgeon Bay. In the 1980s, we also saw large cities like Chicago, Cleveland, and Detroit had major population losses. And BSC was searching for new shipbuilding opportunities. And in 1984, George Geiger signed a contract for $180 million to build 3 container vessels. The agreement was signed in Washington, D.C. in Elizabeth Hanford Dole's office. She was the Secretary of Transportation. Congress was concerned about the American shipbuilding yards as they closely related to the national defense. Shipbuilding was in decline in the country. And the government started a capital construction fund permitting the Sealand Company to invest in the new construction tax-free. Congress provided 50% of the subsidies to offset the price difference between the U.S. and the foreign markets. The contract was for 3 diesel-powered container vessels that were going to sail between Alaska and Puget Sound. This added 1,500 new jobs to the city of Sturgeon Bay. However, the owner's design changes and poorly written contract caused Bay Shipbuilding Company to suffer losses. And would this be the end of shipbuilding in the United States? There was no new shipbuilding contracts in the United States at the end of the 1980s. And there was a question, was this the end of shipbuilding in the United States? Here we see the pictures of the 3 container vessels that were built. A little bit about about the ship. It was 710 feet long, 78 feet wide. They were built in 1985. This was the anchorage, and they sailed between Alaska and Washington. 1990s, another decade. John West retired as chairman in 1988, and retired in January 1988. He died at the age of 82. Excuse me, he died December 1st of 1989, I'm sorry. Ralph Help then became the president and CEO. However, there was some turmoil internally within the company, and in 1990, there was an internal takeover coup by senior Helm staff and 1 board member to take over the company. However, Mr. Helm did fight off the takeover. Mr. Butler was brought in as president and CEO, and Mr. Helm remained as the chairman. And in 1991, Bay Shipbuilding was restructured as a repair and conversion yard only. And at that time, I lived through that time, the statement was made that we would never do new construction again. And then Mr. Butler reduced the management staff by 50%, and the survivors, of which I was one, learned to put on many different hats. You had to do many different jobs. You couldn't just be an expert in one area. He also introduced the EVA Economic Value Program. The idea of this management was to, this was operating profits minus taxes, cost of capital. It was geared toward a reduction of inventory, labor, and equipment. In other words, do the most you can with the little as possible. They also purchased the Toledo Shipbuilding and Cleveland shipyards. Bruce Shaw was selected to manage all 3 facilities. The Manitowoc Company bought back 1.5 million shares in order to lower their cash reserves. This, however, with the West family gone, was a very dramatic change in the company's financial position. They no longer, they totally disregarded the West family original financial values. Gone are those days. And they did issue debt to purchase the Marinette Marine and other companies. In November of 2000, the Manitowoc formed the Manitowoc Marine Group, consisting of Bay Shipbuilding, Marinette Marine, and Cleveland Ship Repair, and Toledo Shipbuilding. And in 2001, the Manitowoc Marine Group had $200 million in contracts. In 2008, during the recession, the Manitowoc Company's debt became overwhelming, as it did with many companies in the 2008 recession. So they elected to sell the Marine Group to Fincantieri. Fincantieri moved in and closed Cleveland Ship Repair and Toledo Shipbuilding. Diversity of construction, was one of the hallmarks of the original Manitowoc Company. And some of the things that we've done over the years, not just self-unloaders, although I think most people think of us as building just self-unloaders. It's not true. We built a lot of passenger vessels. We built a lot of units for the dredging market. We built a lot of tankers and tugs for the petroleum industry, cement haulers, and platform supply vessels. Here's a picture of Hull 741, which is a put-and-ferry passenger vessel. A little bit of a challenging job. In order to keep profit, you really have to, a big company and used to doing big jobs has to really think it through on how they're going to make profit on a small job. And then we also built 2 boats, the Evening Star and the Morning Star, for a customer in Chicago, kind of a passenger tour party boat, so to speak. We also, a little bit later in those 2 vessels, we received the contract to lengthen those 2 vessels along with one of their other vessels. So here it shows a picture of, we brought the vessel into our 311 construction building. We cut it in half, we pulled it apart, and we set a new section in. Lowered the section in and welded it in place and re-outfitted the ferry boat. A picture of, then we take it and we put it on our section carrier and brought it outside where it was finished painted. We built our Hull 752, which was an ice class ferry boat, the Arnie Richter for Washington Island ferries. There's the Bright Star. A new ferry, the Madonna, which was constructed and delivered this past spring, which was 124 feet long and have a capacity of 28 vehicles and 150 passengers. It featured outdoor upper deck seating, climate control indoor cabin with 2 restrooms. And it was also designed to incorporate the ice capacity to offer service throughout the year. And it was delivered in May of 2020. Here we also took a very active role in the dredging market. A picture of the Dipper Dredge, New York, that we built for Great Lakes. And it had a 17.5-yard bucket on it. We also built a suction dredge, the Liberty Island, for that same customer for Great Lakes. And we built a cutter dredge called the Jimmy B for a customer in Michigan. And we built several of these dump barges. These barges were kind of the Manitowoc company design and had the original patent on these. So they were filled with dredge spoils, brought to a dumping site where the owner could start the generator and dump the spoils remotely from the tug. And then we got into the petroleum industry. We were very fortunate to get into the petroleum industry. We built a series of chemical and oil hauling tugs, or barges and tugs. This is our Hull 757, the Barge, Georgia. As you can see, we built many of these tugs and barges. It was a very good industry for us. We built the tug Mayville, which was our Hull 786. And we had to get very creative because we wanted to build the tugs inside the building in order to maximize our production efforts and then roll them out. So we came up with an idea, and we'll play that video for you. As you can see in the video, we would start moving the tug out of the building on a Friday evening, Friday afternoon. Friday evening, we had a crane standing by with the upper structure pilot house. It would swing over. Friday night, the house would be fit. Saturday morning, the vessel was moved with the section carriers onto the dock, dropped on the keel blocks that had been preset, removed those units from the dry dock, and then the dry dock was brought forward to be finished in the north yard by the tugs. We also were big into the spent hauling business. We built a series of highly automated, no human intervention, so to speak, except from a man from one control station, which was the request of the owners, and we did deliver on that. We built a 740 barge and a 760 barge, new construction. And then just recently we were asked to take an old cable laying barge and convert it into a cement unloading barge, which we did, called the Barge Commander. Also very highly automated. We built a series of 3 platform supply vessels. Again, a very complex vessel. It had dynamic positioning where they would position the boat next to the oil rig and tell the boat to stay here. And the boat, no matter what, well, within 4-foot seas, I should say, would maintain its position while the ship transferred product on to the platform and then receive product back from the unit. Built 3 of those. Here we see our Hull 772, the Miss Marlene Tide, one of the platform supply vessels. The Manitowoc company sold its marine business, which included Bay Shipbuilding, to Fincantieri Marine Group, effective on the end of the day, the 31st of December 2008. Prior to 2015, Fincantieri added a new floating dry dock, computer-aided manufacturing equipment during a $26 million capital expansion. So Fincantieri is a leading shipbuilder. Their thoughts for buying a shipyard was to build ships, and they recognized the fact that we needed some modernization if we were going to compete. So who are these Fincantieri people?
The exceptional men and women of Fincantieri Marine Group feel a special passion for the complex ships that they build. Pride in the ships that carry America's finest into harm's way and that protect our nation's interests around the world. Pride in the vessels that keep commerce flowing through the Great Lakes region and the rivers and seas beyond. It's a passion that has at its foundation the work ethic and master craftsmanship that is the heritage of Midwest communities. It's a passion that stems from our values and goals. To embrace tradition and innovation, to lead the industry in quality and efficiency. To place first the safety and well-being of the people in the shipyard and aboard the ships. To build with pride partnerships with our communities and our customers. The people of Fincantieri have been building ships with passion for more than 230 years. And have delivered more than 7,000 ships to military and commercial customers. Our individual talents span the skilled trades and multidisciplined engineering skills that it takes to design and build a ship. We're backed by many thousands of suppliers, businesses large and small, located throughout Wisconsin and across the United States. We recognize the invaluable contributions of the almost 3,000 professionals that comprise our shipbuilding teams, and we're deeply committed to employee safety, well-being, and growth. We've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in equipment and infrastructure improvements to transform our U.S. shipyards into shipbuilding powerhouses. Now, with the ability to build large, complex vessels in serial production. Worker safety is, and will remain, priority one. We could not do what we do without the communities where we reside. We so recognize our responsibility to support and embrace the communities where we work and live. Giving back to our communities takes many forms, including active participation and leadership in charitable and community events. Yes, the ships that we build reflect our goals and values. They represent excellence in manufacturing and are the product of a talented team of shipbuilders using their hearts and hands and minds to write the next chapter of America's storied heartland. This chapter will create new jobs, strengthen America's powerful industrial base, bring prosperity to our communities, provide opportunity to a new generation of our citizens, and defend our liberty around the globe.
Then there became a very unique opportunity for the shipyard. The old Palmer Johnson property, which was our neighbor to the south, decided that they were no longer going to be in business and moving their operations overseas. And the shipyard was up for sale, and the Fincantieri company decided that this was something that we needed for yard expansion. So they purchased it, and you can see here the kind of the main building, the paint building. All the buildings and property were built and remodeled by Bay Shipbuilding. Fincantieri. And that remodeling continues today. If you follow the news, they have Fincantieri North American Operations has received a contract from the United States Navy to build the next frigate, and part of that will be done in Sturgeon Bay. So there's more building construction going to the south, and many of these buildings are being remodeled at this present time. And then I just had a screen of some of the contract listings from beginning to the end. We started on Hull 701. And the Ketchikan, which is Hull 788, is presently being built in the Drydeck for Interlake Steamship, due to be delivered in 2022. Madonna, which is Hull 789, has been delivered. The 787 Great Lakes Trader, if you follow the shipyards, it was moved to the face of the dock, and the tug was brought in, and it recently left the shipyard. So I started on Hull 713 and finished my career on part of 787. Not only that, but we are a shipyard that does not only new construction, we also do repair. And this is a listing of some of the major repair jobs and overhauls that we've done. A lot of them are repowering, where it means that we totally go into the engine room, remove the steam plant, and replace it with a modern day diesel engine. And then we automate to what they call an unmanned engine room, which is the highest level of automation. We've done many of those. We've also replaced engines. We've converted vessels, as indicated before, from something else to another application. And John Munson was one of them that we repowered, a very interesting job. There's several of them in here. I showed you Evening Star to Bright Star, where we lengthened the vessel. But so the shipyard is not only one that does new work. At present, they do new construction in the commercial area. They're doing repair and retrofit work, and they are building sections for the United States Navy. And that role, of course, will be expanded. Okay, this is a picture of the 787 740-foot self-unloading barge, Great Lakes Trader 2. This is a picture of it being constructed in the dock. As I indicated, it was just recently delivered. A little bit about the characteristics of the barge. It was a 740-foot barge, 78-foot beam, 45-foot draft. This vessel is the one that is one of the two vessels that is presently being constructed in the Drydeck. It's a Project Ketchikan. It's a self-unloading barge. It's under construction. Some of the characteristics of the vessel. Also, as I talked about before, the Hull 789, which was a Madonna, which was an ice-breaking vessel for Washington Island, is recently delivered. A little bit about its characteristics: 224 feet long with a 40-foot beam, 20-foot 0.8 draft. Excuse me, 10-foot 0.8 draft. 20 would be way too deep. Caterpillar engines, 28 vehicles, and 150 passengers. It's in service. This is the barge that's also being constructed in the dock. So we actually have two vessels being constructed in the large dock. And this is the second one. This is Hull 790, a 5,400 cubic meter LNG bunkering barge. I'm sure that many of you saw the tanks for this barge that were delivered from a heavy lift ship a few weeks ago, moved around the shipyard and installed in the vessel. I got several calls from folks that were wondering what in the world are those tanks. The tanks are for this barge. Some of its characteristics: 340 feet long with a 66-foot beam. And here is a copy of a typical winter lineup. This is the winter lineup for 2020. Each vessel that comes in is assigned a contract number. And that contract number, once it's assigned, every year that the ship comes back, that it's always issued with the same contract number, only obviously a different year's worth of work. This is issued to all of production to make them aware of, hey, this is what's coming in this winter, so you need to prepare yourself. Also along that goes with this is a slate of job numbers. The job numbers go to all the departments. They obviously change daily, weekly. Some get added, some get nixed. And about once a week or once every 2 weeks, we sit down and have a meeting with the owner on his vessel, and we go over all the job numbers and discuss which ones are done, which ones are pending, and if there's any issues at anyone that need to be talked out, we talk them through. And of course, what would a retired shipbuilder after 46 years do? Take a ride on a boat. Okay, thank you for your interest in shipyards, your interest in shipbuilding. Obviously, shipbuilding is a big part of my life. We're unable, with the present situation, to do this live. So if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer any questions, and you can email me at stewart@tnsmarineservices@charter.net. So thank you and good evening.
So I don't know how to get back into the live part of it. Did she let us in?
Thank you very much.
Are you good? You're on.
Okay.
All right, so Stuart, the first question popped up. Someone asked you, which is your favorite Great Lakes shipping company to work with?
Well.
But if it gives you any indication, that question's from Phil Moore. Just
Yeah, I was going to say it has to be Interlake Steamship. Has to be Interlake Steamship. I saw Phil was on the meeting, but yeah, I'll say that. I'll say Interlake Steamship.
What was your favorite project? What project out of all of those projects that you worked on, what stood out in your mind the most?
Well, actually, I think the one project that probably challenged me the most, and I spent about 2.5 years building the the ship Liberty Island, which basically is a piece of floating underwater mining equipment. It had
Sorry, muted you. Stuart, I muted you. Sorry.
Yep. Okay.
There you go. There
Yeah,
you go. Sorry.
I think that project pushed me hard to the end, but I really enjoyed it when it was complete. Also, there was the conversions that we actually did for Interlake Steamship were also extremely interesting. I found those to be very rewarding too.
There's another question. What does Kamiwa? There's a Kamiwa bow thruster. What does Kamiwa stand for?
Kamiwa is a manufacturer of marine equipment. They're big into CP wheel controls and thrusters and thruster controls. Originally, I believe they were in Walport, Massachusetts, but I think most of their manufacturing now has been moved overseas.
Has Bay Shipbuilding made more, I'm guessing, more money from new construction or repair and conversion work?
If I would answer that, I would be shot. So
sorry, Walter Lewis.
I would be shot. I can't talk about that.
Something about the Manitowoc method. What's the Manitowoc method?
Well, Manitowoc had a lot of things that Mr. West early, put forward, to the company. And, some of his things were, quality, 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 quality in whatever you built was one of his hallmarks. He had an excellent relationship with the men, and I think that really kind of followed through with the company that, you have to recognize the fact that you are a business that rely on your employees. And, you have to really do that relationship. The relationship between you and the workforce is highly important. So, some of the, I think that the mindsets that Mr. West, when he started the business, put forth, really kind of followed through. And I think really try to follow through and are part of what's happening there today.
Anybody, do you know how many employees this went, are we talking, I'm sorry, Paul, are you talking for 2020 or the 2021 winter season? You can unmute yourselves now, folks. I think I made it so you should be able to unmute yourself. Sorry, how many total employees for the 2021 season? Do you know, Stuart?
I don't know exactly what they have scheduled for the winter. I really don't know. Obviously, with the COVID situation, it is. I mean, all of us have seen ships that have been tied up that have not sailed because of the downturn in the economy. So I would suspect, although I can't prove it, I would suspect that, many of the ship owners probably are not going to spend a lot of money on their units or ships this year, kind of maybe wait to see a little bit, how the world economy comes out of that. But as I did say, they are gearing up for their Navy contract. Obviously not. They're building sections for Marinette Marine, and will build sections for the new contract that they got with the Navy Department. But that's a little ways off. Although I see that things are accelerating very rapid. So and they have 2 ships under construction right now. I'm not sure whether they're going to continue that construction during the winter. Most of the time we don't. We will build sections in 311 building and things of that nature, but outside construction is pretty expensive. So if you can avoid that, you like to.
Are we expecting additional Lakers coming in yet for the winter? I know I just saw the Integrity. I don't know if they pulled in just for the repair work or just for the winter yet. Do you know yet how many?
I don't know what the winter. I know I haven't talked to Ms. Cook, so I don't know what the winter lineup is for this winter. Although I'm sure she is working on that lineup diligently and probably has a preliminary list. I guess I should ask her for it. But I'm sure there'll be additional ships coming in. There's no doubt in my mind that will happen. So, but how many? I can't really tell you.
Stuart, I know one of the questions we get here regularly at the museum is, when are the ships going to come in? How is that? Can you talk a little bit about how that's determined?
How ships come in? Well, yeah. They haul material products for customers, and if there is no more demand for those products, that's really the kind of end of their sailing season. Like steel mills like to bring ore in as, kind of like December, January, to get them through the winter. So, if they got enough ore under dock, then that's really all they want until spring. It also becomes very difficult to sail, obviously, when the ice conditions happen. And a lot of times that convinces a lot of ship owners that, you're spending a lot of money and not going very far and fast in the ice. So it's really just time to, head to the barn, so to speak, and lay your vessel out for the winter.
Oh, here's a good one. Will the Wilfred Sykes ever sail again?
Well, I was on the Sykes and I spoke with the shipkeeper just a few weeks back, and I asked him the same question. And he is one of the engineers that sails on there, and he told me that the ship will sail again. Yes.
Good. This is a good one, and maybe you can talk a little bit about the rotary tours. Melissa Landreth is asking if tours are allowed at any time of the shipyard.
Well, the main tour that the shipyard has done every year is with the Rotary Club and I think it's the first week in May.
Correct.
You know, as being the production manager, I can tell you that, you know, it goes through a major event. We have a major cleanup. And then we also try to put some things of interest for the folks that walk through. A lot of times if we have a pilot house, we've done that already from a vessel, so you can walk through that. We've also done some side tank sections where they walk through. You know, we look for points of interest if it's possible. Sometimes there's ships in the yard. A lot of times in May, not so much, but that's the major one. We do small tours to special groups. I'll just leave it at that. But generally, the May tour is the one that the shipyard really opens up to.
This is a good question. So as a U.S. subsidiary of a European country, is work now being done using the metric system?
You know, we tried that on one boat. I don't think they're going to use the metric system again. I can just tell you because we are Americans, right? And it's very difficult because the general workforce in this country, at least the people that work for me, are not so familiar with the metric system. Some are, but the majority not. So I think not. I think they will stay with the standard American system of measurements.
Fair enough. So I'm curious where people are listening from. I know we've got a lot of people, I can recognize a lot of names that are here in Door County. But for those of you that are not listening to us in Door County, can you type in the chat where you're from, where you're listening to us? Hi, Ohio. We hit Canada, Stuart.
Yeah.
Ontario. Hi, guys. Stuart, is it tough to see the ships that are built at the shipyard go to the scrapyard?
Yeah. Yeah, especially if it's one of the ships that, you know, you took part in either doing a conversion and over the years repair work on. I think there's always, I think you kind of build a relationship with the ships and certainly a lot of memories. And when that ship goes to the scrapyard, yeah, I think you probably lose a little bit of yourself.
Oh, here's a cool note. Karen Mortensen, who's down in Urbana, Illinois, she said her parents met working at the shipyard in Sturgeon Bay in World War II.
Oh, cool.
How much shipyard romance did you deal with, Stuart, when you worked there?
I personally dealt with no shipyard romance. None.
Well, good. Well, if anybody has any last questions or comments, please type them in the chat real quick. My one last little pitch. Here at the Maritime Museum, we are hosting our annual Maritime Festival of Trees. It's a big fundraiser for the Maritime Museum. We do sell raffle tickets here, which you have to buy in person, and then you put them in the decorated tree or whatnot of your choice. We're doing that through January 3rd. So if you're up in the Door County area, come in the museum, see the beautiful trees. And the next presentation, once again, is going to be Mike McCarthy pedaling around Door County. That's Thursday, January 7th, 7 p.m. And we'll do some posts in case anybody's interested in hearing of the Mike. And with that, Stuart, thank you.
Yep, thank you. I hope everyone enjoyed it.
Good night, everybody. And we will post this to YouTube, our DC Maritime YouTube channel. So if you want to watch it again, Phil Moore's waving at you. It'll be on our YouTube channel.